talk about what we're going to talk about today because it's been on my mind for at least a year, and I feel like I've talked to everyone I know in tech about this at some point or other. And look, it's pretty simple. Tech hiring is broken, right? It's broken for people looking for jobs. It's broken for employers. It's just a mess. And so today we're going to talk about that in detail. And more importantly, I didn't want to talk about it until I felt like we in Tech Hub had at least maybe a small hint of an answer, a solution to the issues that we see. And so that's really what this is all about. What can we do about it? That's what we're going to talk about today. So, okay, so what are we going to talk about? Well, first, we're going to do a little historical tour of the industry, and then we're going to do a deep dive into all the ways that finding jobs and finding new hires, if you're an employer, is just really hard and kind of painful. And then we're actually going to talk about why that's the case. And I'm going to warn you right now, there's probably something in here that's not going to match with your experience that you might disagree with. That's okay. The world is a big place and everyone's experience is going to be a bit different. All I can do is talk about what I've seen and what I've tried to distill from the dozens and dozens of conversations that I've had with people about this stuff. And finally, I want to introduce some ideas on how to start a new conversation, one that's more honest and equitable and sustainable for all the stakeholders out there. Okay, so let's dive in. How did we get here? Well, when we talk about the tech industry, I'm going to arbitrarily say that it started as an industry around the time of the space program. So this is mission control in Houston during the Apollo program. That's Gene Kranz in the middle there, and a bunch of engineers and techs surrounding him. Now, with our modern 2020 eyes, what is the thing that jumps out at you here in this picture? It's a bunch of white guys, right? Really smart white guys who went to Harvard and MIT and Berkeley, but basically a bunch of dudes, with the singular exception of the one guy there in the corner, right? That's what the tech industry looked like back then. It was a relatively small group of nerdy dudes. And today, tech has taken over entire swaths of the economy, and we've made great strides in changing that reality. And of course, we've still got a ways to go, but it's true. Tech has become immeasurably richer because of the diversity of backgrounds and perspectives and experiences that we have now, even if we're all stuck in a permanent Zoom call these days. But it's okay. So why are we doing this history lesson? Well, I feel like it's important to understand the inertia that still exists in hiring, because we're still basically using the same old model from 50 years ago, even though the world actually has changed quite a bit. I mean, I hope no one's still asking how to find cycles in linked lists and interviews and stuff, but I bet there are a lot of people still doing that. All right, so let's actually dive in. What's going on? What's so broken? And if there's one thing that I want you to understand, it's that it's not just broken for those of you looking for a job. Companies all basically know that it's a massive challenge from their perspective as well. Okay, so what do job seekers face? Well, for one thing, training is expensive, right? For your colleges, obviously, but also code schools and retraining aren't really that cheap when you figure on the time you're spending not working or doing other things. The other thing is it's incredibly competitive for those entry-level jobs, right? Hundreds, maybe 1,000 applicants for one job. It's kind of nuts. And so as a result, it's hard to stand out. You're forced to do all these other things like curate a beautiful GitHub repo with a bunch of awesome projects that you did, supposedly just for the fun of it, right? And the other thing that's a real fact is actually just plain old biased hiring processes. And not just biases against protected classes, although that does happen, of course, but also, for example, your college, your path to getting there. People have all sorts of preconceived notions about what the right candidate looks like. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about this later. And so the result is it's hard to get a junior job, right? But employers also face all sorts of awful problems. For one, they're actually desperate for good talent. Ask any CTO or VP or director. I talked to a lot of them. They can't find the people. They're kind of desperate. But at the same time, they're swamped with applicants whenever they advertise a junior position. And seriously, like, put yourself in their shoes. You just got 1,000 resumes for one position. Do you know what 1,000 resumes looks like? It's like 1,500 pages of text that you have to read. And then somehow you have to select like 100 people you need to phone screen. Well, that's 115 to 30-minute conversations. I mean, we're talking a full-time week of work, just phone screening. And then maybe you whittle it down to 10 in-person interviews. Well, that's 10 hours per interviewer, right? It's exhausting. That's what they're faced with. That's what employers are faced with. And so, yeah, it's so hard to evaluate applicants that companies are forced to put up artificial barriers, like that, mythical requirement for 2 years of experience, right? And yet, in spite of everything, it's brutally difficult to differentiate yourself as a company to the superstars you do want to attract, right? Why would they pick your company over some other company? And finally, recruiters. And look, a lot of recruiters are really good. I have great relationships with a lot of them. But as an industry, we all know that there are a lot of problems out there. People hoovering up resumes, presenting candidates that don't fit, or presenting too many, or not adding a whole lot of value while still charging $20,000 to $30,000 a placement, right? That's just the reality. And so let's kind of look behind these issues. Like, why are things the way they are currently in tech? And if there's one thing that I've learned in thinking about systemic dysfunction, it's that you first have to look at the incentives of the people in the system. So let's dive in. This is kind of my view of why things are the way they are. Thing number one, job market entrants haven't really been told the whole story. For example, your guidance counselor, your university professor, or job retraining advisor, or maybe some code school salesman, they don't really have the full picture, and they're not always incentivized to tell you the real situation, which is that getting an entry-level job in tech is actually insanely difficult. But other stuff too, right? For example, you want to do software design, but you can't get that job. So should you take that QA job and try to lateral into design? Nobody ever gets a good answer to these sorts of questions. And that manager needs somebody to do QA right now. And so they might make noises about a possibility of moving that maybe never quite materializes. Again, incentives, right? And this is something that may come as a shock, but I really do believe that companies are still in denial about what junior tech jobs are all about. I looked up some statistics earlier this week at the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the BLS. There are 4.3 million auto workers in the country right now. I mean, pre-COVID. There are 4.4 million programmers. Starting out as a junior front-end developer, for example, is basically a blue-collar job. And there's nothing wrong with that. Blue-collar jobs let our parents and our grandparents have a good, comfortable life and put some of us through college. But companies don't hire that way, right? For example, one thing is a lot of large companies, they demand 4-year degrees to get hired as a programmer. And so then you ask why, because I asked why. And turns out part of the answer is that so that the job can be an exempt job, which means it lets them ask you to sign something that gives up the right to ask for overtime pay. And you ask, well, why is that an important requirement? And then the answer is, well, it's a bunch of things. It's signaling. They don't want to jeopardize the H-1B status of some of their employees, a bunch of other reasons, right? So that's definitely an issue. And the other thing is there's lots of resistance to changing how people hire. Hiring managers want to hire for rock stars. This is an example of what psychologists call the fundamental attribution error. And it comes up so much in hiring. People want to hire people like themselves. Those CTOs have been programming since they were 8. They went to a good East Coast or UC school. They're just like those NASA engineers 50 years ago. The process they use is how they'd hire themselves, the kind of process they'd like to go through, and probably the process that they did go through. But doing React JavaScript at the junior level, it's not rocket science. I mean, it's not easy, of course. It takes training and learning and all of that. But it's just like learning how to manufacture a car transmission. And I feel strongly that we can't keep putting blue-collar workers through white-collar interview processes. Those kind of terms are kind of ancient, but it's still sort of fundamentally true. And it doesn't work. 99% of companies won't get those Stanford CS rockstar grads anyway, and they'll mess up the process for the people that they actually can get and that would be incredibly good employees for their companies. And there's a warning here for companies out there, people who are hiring right now. No matter how bad it is right now in terms of the talent wars, I'm going to claim that actually you've had it pretty easy until now because it's about to get worse. Work from home means there's no locality advantage. which means that you're competing with every company on earth for the quality talent. I mean, you saw, as Claude mentioned earlier today, Facebook, Twitter. It doesn't matter if you're in Wisconsin, right? Like that could be something that you have to think about. And so, yeah, you're going to have to think about changing your recruiting approach. So it's not just on the companies, though. Those of you who are looking for jobs, you're all applying to too many jobs. But it makes sense because at the margin, the cost of 1 extra or 10 extra applications is minimal, so you might as well just do it, right? But the result is that every job gets 1,000 applicants. The current state of affairs is a Nash equilibrium for those of you who know a little bit of game theory. The global situation sucks for everyone, but everyone, again, they're just responding to their incentives. The ideal would be for each job to get maybe a dozen or so applicants, but we can't seem to get there from here. And so, okay, so what do companies do? Well, they have to make this crush of applicants manageable, that famous 2-year experience requirement. Yeah, there's value to it for companies, right? People do learn important things in those 2 years, but a lot of the value is just that it filters out people who can't hold down a job or they're jerks or just kind of have other issues, right? The big thing is, though, that it makes it easier to evaluate people because it's much easier to evaluate concrete skills than more general abilities and potential. And so it's just easier to evaluate that. In fact, a lot of the consulting that I do in my day job is teaching companies how to get away from the kind of question that's like, hey, do you know the React Hooks API backwards and forwards, right? And speaking of interviews, look, we all know they suck, right? Most people are terrible at interviewing people. And look, the situation is so artificial. And for those of you who have done interviewing and done hiring, I'm sure you all remember that person you hired that crushed the interview, but ended up being kind of a poor marginal employee. And I'm sure you remember vice versa, maybe somebody who just barely squeaked in, maybe after some debate where you had to really fight for them. And then they turned out to be a superstar, right? And the reason is clear, right? There's just kind of little correlation between interviewing, the skills you show in an interview, and how it is in the actual job. But we keep doing it because it's what we've always done. And it's kind of risky to deviate, right? And of course, as I said, there's kind of sketchy recruiters out there that oftentimes make things worse. Not a lot, but sometimes. Okay, so far it's been just one complaint after another. So the question is, how can we fix this, right? What is it that we need in order to try to fix some of these issues? Well, one of the things we need is a cost-effective way of doing that screening, right? Because you can't have every company for every job screening 1,000 people. It's just not sustainable as an industry. We need a way to bypass these ineffective and biased interviews, right? We know they're artificial. We know they're not very correlated to how people do in the job. What we really want is an efficient way to simulate what real workplace interactions are like. That's the goal. I mean, that's what internships do, right? I mean, you bring somebody in, you work with them for a few months, but for a lot of companies, that's kind of a heavy lift. You have to do like on-campus recruiting, and it's restricted to people who are in school for some artificial reason. I don't know why that's the case. And so we need to sort of figure out a way to make this more palatable to job seekers and to employers. And honestly, I think what we need is a leap of faith on behalf of job seekers, and but perhaps more importantly, a leap of faith on behalf of employers that realize, look, this isn't so great. If we can figure out a way to try something different without it sort of being a huge risk, let's just try it. And so the big message I want to get out of this is, look, if you are somebody who's hiring tech people, if you know somebody who is, I want to talk to them. I want to understand what their challenges are, and I want to offer them hopefully a new service and a new program from San Diego Tech Hub. So all this is leading up to the introduction of a new program here, which we're calling the 4-hour internship. And so the 4-hour internship is quite simply, it's an opportunity for job seekers and hiring managers to actually work together. Okay, so what is it? Well, it's a remote 4-hour co-working session. And those 4 hours are split up into two 2-hour blocks. And so each job seeker over the course of the 4 hours gets to meet and work with 2 employers, possibly, their future boss, one each in those 2 2-hour sessions. And each employer or potential employer gets to meet and work with 8 job seekers, 4 job seekers in each of those 2-hour sessions. And so what you end up doing is in each of those 2-hour sessions, you work on a custom crafted project, a project that we've developed that sort of hits that exact sweet spot of the skills and abilities that people are looking for in these 5-person teams, 4 job seekers and 1 hiring manager. So let's talk about what it looks like for job seekers first. When you sign up, what happens? Well, there's an initial screening step. And this initial screening step, I don't need to see your resume. I don't really care where you came from, right? Like it's just 15 minutes, maybe not even that, just to talk about and just do some really simple things to see that you can do the basics in the job that you're looking for, right? And so once you've done this initial screening step, you're in the 4-hour internship, and you will be, matched up with employers. And so this is incredibly attractive, hopefully for employers as well, because again, we're factoring out the task of screening across multiple employers. Again, like I said, 2-hour sessions with 1 quality employer in each. We're going to be vetting the employers. These are not going to be bullshit jobs. And it's going to be highly tailored to the job you're seeking. I've mentioned front-end developers a lot in this talk because I feel like that's the number one thing that people are out there looking for, both on the employer and job seeker side, but we're going to have multiple different sort of avenues for this sort of event. And yeah, you end up forming a team with your hiring manager from the company and 3 new friends, 3 fellow job seekers, and you work on a real project as a real team. And the goal here is just to make this as close to the real thing, as close to the real job as we could possibly get in 4 hours. Now, I'm sure you're all sort of thinking like, uh-oh, what's the catch? And I will tell you, there is no catch for the job seeker side. It is 100% free. Like, you don't have to put up anything. Just send your email, maybe spend 15 minutes with me doing a little screening, and then that's it. You're in. Trying to make it as low friction for you as we can. How does it work for the employers? Well, as I said, we do the screening. 8 quality applicants is what you're going to talk to and work with during that 4-hour session, 4 in each of the 2-hour sessions. And you don't have to do this initial screening step in a time-consuming way yourself. Like I said, if we can amortize the cost of doing this across multiple employers, we all win. Job seekers win, employers win. It's just kind of taking more friction out of that relationship. And yeah, of course, you get to evaluate technical skills in these projects, but just as importantly, you get to evaluate all those other skills that are so incredibly hard to get at in an interview, right? How do people work? How do people interact with their peers, with their bosses? You get to evaluate that in a very natural, organic manner. So it's not sort of these artificial, like psychology kind of questions or anything like that. You just like start working and see how it goes, right? And look, we'll give you all the guidance you need on the projects and how they're structured and kind of what the outcomes are supposed to be, some tips on how to run the teams, how to evaluate, and you can take as much or as little of this guidance as you want. It's entirely up to you as an employer, but we're trying to give you as much structure as you need to be successful. And look, you can integrate this with your normal hiring process. At the end of the 4-hour internship, you talk to somebody, you want to keep going with them, you want to continue on the process, it's up to you. You could start them over from zero. I can't imagine you would want to do that, but I would expect most companies would just want to bring them on for an onsite or something like that. The point is, we don't prescribe anything on how you should run your process. We're just going to help you integrate with your normal process. And the goal of all of this is just to give you as an employer a low cost, low risk way to sort of hire in a different way, kind of sidestep some of those issues that we've talked about. So I'm going to give you the example of a front-end dev just to kind of give you some real concrete understanding of like what's actually going to happen. Well, you're going to log in at the beginning of the session and you're going to log into a collaborative coding environment, right? So for those of you who haven't seen this before, imagine it's like Google Docs where you're all typing at the same time. You can see what each other is typing, and you work together on a solution in these sort of structured projects that we've put together. All the back-end stuff, like the build environment, all that is taken care of for you. So it's literally just like sit down and start working, right? And beside it, obviously, you're going to be on a video chat with your teammates, your 4 teammates, working through problems and working together on things during that 2-hour session. Take a little break, get reassigned with some new friends and a new potential employer, and we'll do it again with a different project for another 2 hours. That's the picture. We're going to run these obviously for front-end dev and for a bunch of other things like data science and other sort of software-y or tech jobs to start with. So that's the picture. If this is something that interests you as either a job seeker or as an employer, let me know. Go to 4hourinternship.com or go to the San Diego Tech Hub page as well. Send me an email, find me on SDTH Slack. I feel like I'm pretty accessible, but again, like I said, my goal here is to work with all of you and all the people that we have sort of working on these projects and these systems in order to actually provide people in San Diego with a better option. And so with that, I guess I want to sort of open up the floor. I went through a bunch, but I do want people to sort of have a chance to talk and sort of ask questions or make comments or whatever. Let's sort of open this up.
Yeah, I know there's a few questions sort of coming in. So I'm going to try to maybe summarize just to kind of prime things for people to kind of adjust. I think one of the things that are coming up, when you talk about this, it was focused on tech. You mentioned data science. What about some other roles? When we think about San Diego Tech Hub, it's just not focused on software. So you might have UX, product, program management. How do you see this sort of model working for other disciplines outside of like a pure software development role?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think in principle, I don't see any reason this model can't work for all of those jobs. The reason that I started kind of in the, just programmer job is because there's tons of them out there. There's tons of need for them. And it's something that I feel I know pretty well. I'd love to be able to partner with people who have done hiring in those other areas, to be able to work with them on building a program surrounding, UX or product management or anything like that. I think there's a ton of potential there for people who are really motivated to try to structure something for those jobs.
Awesome. I'll open up to the floor to see if anyone has any questions. If not, I have a couple more to kind of send your way. Any questions on the phone?
I have a question. Can I ask?
Sure. Yeah, please.
Awesome. Okay. Well, I'm going to introduce myself because this is my first time at San Diego Tech Hub meetup. Actually, like one of my first time at a meetup. My name is Heya. I recently graduated both college and a coding bootcamp called Learn. Thank you, Benjamin, for inviting me to this cool meetup. Everyone's so cool. And all right. So I have two questions. First of all, I think it's a really cool idea as I start to look for jobs now. And again, entry-level jobs are a conundrum because they ask for experience, but I don't know how to get the experience. So it's like
it's crazy chicken and egg, right?
Yeah. So the first question is the two employers, the challenge that we're doing for them, is it related to their company's work? And is it going to be used for their company, or is it something very like random and separated from their company's work?
Great question.
Yeah, I'll ask that first and then I'll ask the second question.
Yeah. So it will vary depending on how much involvement the company is going to want to have in designing these programs. We want to have some shovel-ready things so that so the companies can just literally just plug in, right? Like, okay, yes, I need some React front-end devs. Like, yes, I'm just going to plug into that thing that you guys already have prepped. I've been talking to a couple of companies that are more interested in like, okay, working with us to really design something that is very relevant to the things they're looking for. Whether it will be actually sort of used in their production environment, I'd be kind of surprised, but I guess, I wouldn't rule that out.
Awesome. Okay, so my second question is, you said we'll be working with team of 4, and how will that team be like chosen? Like is it depends on our level? Is it going to be balanced out, or is it like higher skilled people together, or random? And will it be the same team in both projects?
So no, so it'll be a different team in both projects. So, in an ideal world, you're going to work with 3 people in the first project and 3 different people with a different company in the second project. As to the skills, I think I want to be agnostic about that for 2 reasons. One is that the screening process is going to be fairly, it's not going to be an extensive screening process to get into the 4-hour internship. So it'll be hard for us to evaluate like whether you're a total superstar or whether, you're just kind of getting your feet wet. So I will expect that at least initially, we're going to see a lot of variety and sort of spread in people that are coming in asking for, or looking for jobs. And part of the guidance we're going to give the employers is sort of how to handle that spread, right? Like how to sort of partition the work in a way that makes sense. We have people that I'm working with on this, decent amount of experience doing that kind of thing. And so I'm optimistic that we'll be able to manage that.
Awesome, thank you. And just one last question. I'm like totally new to San Diego Tech Hub. I'm actually new to San Diego, so I'm not familiar with the 4-hour internship. Is it something that's like new, and like how far, like what's the timeline? And I can see like so many job seekers like interested in that, but like maybe not as many companies, in terms of proportion. And how are you going to kind of handle with that?
Yeah, I would say I spend a decent chunk of my day talking to employers in and around the San Diego area, just trying to sort of get a sense of what their concerns are, what their needs are. Because as I said in the presentation, this is going to require a lift on our part as, San Diego Tech Hub to get the word out to employers that, are willing to take a chance. I think the one saving grace about what's going on in the world right now is that it really does give us a chance to hit the reset button on a lot of things. It's not business as usual anymore. And so I'm optimistic that this is actually a great time to try something different and new.
Awesome. Thank you.
Awesome. So we do have a few questions sort of coming in through chat. I'm going to try to summarize some of this stuff. So, I think there's this idea of 4 hours. Is that really all that's needed? And anything from, is that enough to sort of gauge someone's experience? Is that enough to be able to sort of kind of see cultural fit? You could be technically savvy and be able to do that, but you get in and like you said, you're kind of working with, someone that might not be a great fit or a team partner. There's also some questions, again, with 4 hours being to assess, a context switching, the ability to kind of adapt to different technologies, right? You might be skilled in one thing, but if you're on that job, you have to kind of pivot to something else. How would you adjust for that? So how is 4 hours really enough, man, to address all these concerns?
Right. It's a great question. I think clearly the answer is like no, because internships where people are in a company for 3 months, I've hired hundreds and hundreds of interns in my career. Like sometimes at the end of the 3 months, you're still kind of left scratching your head. Like, I don't know. So yeah, you're right. Like 4 hours is definitely not enough. But I think what we're trying to do is give enough insight that lets companies feel comfortable about, okay, this person doesn't have an Ivy League degree and doesn't have 2 years of experience, but I'll be damned if that person didn't just crush it for the 2 hours that I saw that person. And so again, like I said, this will slide into the regular interview path if companies want to. And so I want to think of it as a different way to get in as opposed to a different way to get out, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. The other thing that some comments are coming through saying, hey, they'd rather spend 4 hours, being able to kind of test their skills to prove themselves to the company than go into a free hackathon, something. And so I think it's a better way of being able to utilize that time to really make an impact for a company. And you also mentioned, I think Daniel had brought a comment like having this being integrated as part of the interview process instead of something completely separate. And it sounds like you addressed that as well. This could be something that's supplemental to kind of get in there, which I think is great. Let's see here. So if no one has questions, I have a few. Let me pause for a second or two, see if anyone wants to.
Can I jump in with a quick question?
Please.
Do it.
Hi, Augustine. I think it was a great idea. I'm talking about it in the chat. From the candidate side, it's an interview and it's kind of scary, especially if you're targeting juniors. This is going to be a very broad, widely structured thing. A startup doesn't maybe have the materials and the time to set up a big structure for their interviews, but this is a big scalable structure. When I think of big scalable structures, I think of like Facebook, Google, they have sort of this huge interview pipeline. And one of the big things is their prep materials. Is that if I'm going into interview at Google, they give me a really good idea of how to prepare. are you going to be able to provide any of that stuff? Or like, is there any way to sort of, if I'm looking for a job, to like also use this as a resource to like get better at this kind of interview?
So there's two things there that I think are relevant. One is that, yeah, like, if you sign up, you get through the screening process, you're in, we're going to send you a document, like how to log in, how to get sort of comfortable doing things, like just sort of very basic stuff so you can actually hit the ground running on the day. But the other thing is, you can go through as many of these as you want, right? Like there's no restriction on saying like, it's not a one and done thing. Like you do one internship and then you're barred from ever doing it again, right? So, do your first one, get your feet wet, it might be scary, but I'm sure by the second, third, or fourth one, you'd be like, okay, I can do this, right? And again, I think that's healthy, right? Because it takes down the temperature of that evaluation mode, right? Like it's so counterproductive to how people actually work. Like you don't put your juniors through incredibly stressful situations on day one. So like, why would you do it during the interview, right? Let's take that temperature down a little bit.
Yeah, I have a question.
Yep.
My question is around one of the best things about working in tech is that you get to work in teams, you get to be collaborative, and you get to work in many different domains. The technical side is very important. Don't get me wrong. You definitely should be able to code and do the software engineering, and all the CS stuff is important. But how do you feel like we are failing from both sides on the soft skills? I mean, you bring up the perfect example of an internship where somebody worked with you for 3 months at a low pay or no pay, and they still didn't feel 100%. Now, my intuition says that probably comes from either soft skills, the work ethic, the communication within the team, or just their general like way that they become interested or not interested in the domain that they're working in.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think whenever I've had a tough decision about, whether to hire an intern or not, it's definitely been like, it's not so much can they do the work or not. You get to figure that out pretty quickly. And yeah, it is sort of that, like, how are they going to fit into the team kind of question. Now, of course, like the flip side of that is a lot of the, like, how are they going to fit into the team? Hey, let's go out for a beer after work kind of pseudo interview things is actually kind of code for some less good stuff. The other thing about it is, and not sort of ramble on too much, but look, engineers kind of self-select for people who aren't like necessarily the most gregarious people to begin with. And so, yeah, I think as an educational system, we need to do a lot better at that. But again, hopefully going through a lot of these events in a short amount of time sort of gets you some of that experience in a hopefully lower stress kind of environment. I hope that addresses kind of your question.
All right.
Oh, I love the most recent question. I feel like that is like almost like teed up for me.
Yeah, and I think that was the other thing. When you think about what you're building here, it's sort of a marketplace, right? And there's two sides to that. You got to have obviously the job seekers, which there's no shortage of. But in order for this to work, you got to have these companies that are involved. And I think what you called about the trust or leap of faith,
right?
Leap of
faith.
Yeah. So
leap of faith, but there's also financials associated with it. And that's what that question's all about. Like, why should I do this? Right? Well, I'm going to give you two answers. One, how much time is your HR recruiting junior engineers, sifting through resumes, doing like phone screens, all that stuff, right? Like that's an awful lot of productivity that you're losing. And then just even more concrete dollars and cents, like every time you pay a recruiter some amount of money for a hire, like what if you could do it in a way that you didn't have to do that, right? And what we're targeting for the cost for an employer is 1/10 the cost of a recruiter placement. That's what we're targeting. So hopefully the financial incentive is there for companies to try something different as well.
So how many companies do you have partnering with you?
Well, I will say, like in full disclosure and honesty, I'm in conversations with about a dozen, but nobody signed on the dotted line yet. I think a lot of people actually wanted to wait for this particular event to see, like, okay, is this for real? Or so stay tuned.
All right. Do you see this style of interview process applicable to early stage startups?
I think it's tough. I mean, it depends on the early stage startup. This is just me sort of off the top of my head thinking about it. Early stage startups typically need people who could hit the ground running really fast because the clock is ticking the second they start hiring people. So unlikely that this will be, at least in its current form, that attractive to really small startups. But as soon as that startup needs to hire a junior engineer of some type, or a junior UX person, or a junior product manager, or something like that, I think it's good. So maybe not for startups with fewer than 10 people. Probably starting with more than 10 people, you could probably start thinking about it.
All right. Any other questions for the community?
So when is this gonna start?
Well, the website's up. I am hoping to see a flood of people saying, "Hey, I want to participate," and I'm hoping to see a flood of companies saying, "Hey, this sounds kind of interesting. Let's talk." And so, I mean, if we have that flood, then we can start. We can start soon.
Hey, yeah, this is Lance. I'm kind of in the same background as Heya, but I'm not with Heya right now. So,
Fooled me.
So this whole idea of having something like this internship, I'm not even to use internship, but it's more of a you're basically trying and seeing what's happening with the person. But I just feel that it's a whole process, and this is one sliver of the process. And I would agree with that. This is very novel and a neat way to at least say, let's try it. But you have something really before, which is the identification, sifting through, and then the identification. And that's where I see a lot of the companies don't do a good job because they can't even get to where you're going yet.
Right.
And there is no urgency. Like, they don't have a sprint to say, okay, we need to identify 30 different people, and you need to do it in the next 3 days.
Yep.
I've been in a lot of large companies where it lingers on for 5 or 6 months.
I know.
Because there is no urgency. And
yeah,
so
it's crazy.
I would like to, and I wrote back saying, I would like to volunteer because part of this is really instilling in them that, hey, you know what? You need to really shorten this out for the people who are out there who want to get hired.
Yeah, and the thing is, it's totally counterproductive for the companies that stretch it out, because you're just shooting yourself in the foot. Like, all the best candidates are going to get a ton of offers, and they're just going to take the first good one that they see, probably, right? And so the more you stretch it out, the more you sort of like, oh yeah, somebody applied, but I didn't get back to them 2 weeks later. Like, that person's gone. I'm sorry. Right. And so you just end up adverse selecting yourself for the people who can't get those other jobs. And so it's in every company's best interest to go as fast as possible. Uh-oh. Lance, you're muted. There we go.
Sorry about that. But I think in this, it's just something that you really need to take a look at to really bring them along, to say, hey, okay, this is one thing now. Hey, let's identify and let's help you identify those great candidates. And then this is your internship. So identification, internship, just give them a model, because they really, for the comment that was in there's no incentive for them to really identify.
So that's actually what I do in my day job, actually, is consulting with tech companies on how to improve their hiring practices anyway. So I think there's kind of a natural fit there.
That's great.
Augustine, I know that at one point in time, I see Xavier is on. We were starting a program as part of Workforce Partnership to work with companies to take that leap of faith on, young grads or any individual that was looking to transition into the job market. And, they actually had money sitting there willing to pay, to kind of bootstrap someone to kind of build the experience that you're saying for a certain number of hours. Do you see kind of this program kind of evolving to help support that? People kind of get that, they get some extra pay, or could that be another incentive other than the reduction of the interview process, also to help front the cost for?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no question. I think, this 4-hour internship, it's kind of it's a small stake in the ground. Like, this is sort of a statement of intent. Like, we need to fix some stuff here. But I talked to Xavier earlier, last week about some of this in San Diego workforce group. I can see a lot of different ways that this can go in a productive way relating to some of the stuff that they do.
Awesome. All right. Any other questions from the community? All right. So it sounds like, next steps is, we're expecting signups and other things to happen. And I guess if people, let me bring up the, do you mind if I share my screen?
No, yeah, go ahead. Here, I'll stop mine.
Okay. So for those that want to know, I did paste the link in our channel, but if you go to San Diego Tech Hub's main page, from there, resources, and then scroll down, you'll see the 4-hour internship. From there, you can find more information, which I'm assuming is very similar to what you have on your site with
Right.
signups. You have a chance to register going there, but to give you a bit of background. And then, Augusta and I will be partnering to see how we can continue to work with the San Diego Tech Hub community, tapping into the employers and the job seekers and really honing in on that. So Augusta, we'll definitely be in touch. But I encourage you all that if you are looking for jobs, this is an avenue to kind of take something new, take that leap of faith, try something new, change the world.
Awesome. Thanks, Claude. Thanks for giving me the opportunity.
Not a problem. All right. Well, I want to thank you for sharing your idea and your time. I think this is something that's great that you're offering and just kind of making a way of helping to change the game. San Diego Tech Hub Conduits, thank you very much for showing up and attending. The questions and the feedback I thought was very interesting and intriguing. So thank you for that. And if I don't talk to you all before next month, I hope to see you all next month, June 30th.
All right. See you, everyone.
All right, take care. Bye-bye.